The bitter December wind howled across the vast Texas plains like a wounded animal as Olivia Evans urged her exhausted mare through the deepening snow. The blizzard had struck with a vengeance hours ago, transforming the familiar trail back to Abilene into an unrecognizable white wasteland. It was 1874, and Olivia was beginning to fear that her 24 years on this earth might end right here in this frozen hell. "Just a little farther, Penny," she whispered to her horse, the words evaporating instantly in the frigid air. The temperature had plummeted far below what anyone in Taylor County had expected for early winter. Olivia had only meant to deliver medicines to the Wilson homestead, 5 miles out of town, where 3 children had fallen ill with fever. As the only trained nurse within 20 miles, she couldn't refuse the desperate father's plea for help. Now she was paying the price for her compassion. The snow had begun falling shortly after she'd left the Wilson farm, and within an hour, it had transformed into the worst blizzard she'd witnessed since moving to Texas from Ohio 2 years prior. Her fingers, despite her thick gloves, had gone numb. Her face burned from the relentless sting of ice crystals. Penny stumbled, and Olivia felt the mare's strength failing. The poor animal had been pushing through knee-deep snow for too long. "Please, girl," she begged, patting the horse's neck. "We need to find shelter." A violent gust of wind slammed into them from the north, and Penny reared suddenly, throwing Olivia from the saddle. She landed hard in a deep snowbank, the breath knocked from her lungs as pain shot through her left ankle. Above her, Penny whinnied in terror before bolting into the whiteness. "No." "Come back," Olivia cried, struggling to her feet only to collapse as her injured ankle gave way beneath her. The pain was excruciating. Broken or badly sprained, it didn't matter, she couldn't walk. Panic rose in her throat as she realized the gravity of her situation. No horse, no shelter. No one knew exactly where she was, and the temperature was still dropping as night approached. With desperate determination, Olivia began to crawl through the snow, dragging her injured leg behind her. She had to find something, a tree, a rock formation, anything that might provide minimal protection from the elements. The wind cut through her wool coat like it was made of paper, and the snow continued to accumulate around her. After what seemed like hours but was likely only 20 minutes, her strength began to fade. Each movement became more difficult than the last, and the cold seeped into her bones, making her thoughts sluggish. She knew the signs of hypothermia from her medical training. Soon, paradoxically, she would begin to feel warm as her body shut down. "I'm not ready to die," she whispered, but her limbs refused to cooperate anymore. The snow had drifted against her body, partially burying her where she lay. With the last of her strength, Olivia managed to sit up slightly, hoping against hope that she might spot a light or landmark in the distance. There was nothing but white in every direction. As consciousness began to slip away, Olivia thought of her parents back in Ohio, who had opposed her decision to move west. They had wanted her to marry the banker's son and live a comfortable life in their small town. But Olivia had dreamed of more, of being truly needed, of making a real difference in people's lives. Now, she would die alone in a Texas blizzard, and her parents would never even know what happened to her. The snow continued to fall, piling around her body, burying her up to her waist, then her chest. Her head lolled as she fought to stay awake, knowing that sleep meant certain death. But the cold was too pervasive, too powerful. Her eyelids grew impossibly heavy. Her last conscious thought was that at least she had tried to live bravely. Dane Irwin had been tracking the stray cattle for hours before the blizzard hit. At 30 years old, he'd weathered enough Texas winters to know this one was different, more vicious, more intent on claiming lives. He'd managed to round up most of the strays from his small ranch, but 3 calves remained missing. When the snow began to fall heavily, he knew he had to abandon the search and head back to his cabin, 5 miles northwest of Abilene. His gelding, Thunder, was sure-footed and experienced, picking his way carefully through the deepening snow while Dane hunched in the saddle, his sheepskin coat and wide-brimmed hat offering minimal protection against the onslaught. The wind shifted suddenly, and Thunder stopped, ears pricking forward. "What is it, boy?" Dane asked, his voice nearly lost in the howling gale. The horse nickered nervously, pawing at the snow. Then Dane heard it the distressed whinnying of another horse. Through the curtain of white, he spotted a chestnut mare, riderless and clearly panicked, fighting against the wind. "Easy there," Dane called, carefully guiding Thunder closer. He recognized the mare as belonging to the nurse from town, Miss Evans. He'd seen her riding it on his infrequent visits to Abilene. A cold dread settled in his stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. If her horse was here, where was she? Grabbing the mare's reins, Dane looked around desperately. "Miss Evans!" He shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the storm. The nurse's saddlebags were still attached, which meant she hadn't intentionally released her horse. She was out here somewhere. "We've got to find her, Thunder," he muttered, tying the mare's reins to his saddle. "She won't last long in this." Dane urged his horse forward, following the mare's tracks backward as best he could before they disappeared under fresh snowfall. The sky was darkening rapidly, both from the approaching night and the thickening storm clouds. Soon, he wouldn't be able to see more than a few feet in front of him. After nearly an hour of searching, Dane was about to concede defeat when Thunder stopped abruptly again. The horse was staring intently at something in the distance. Squinting through the snow, Dane could just make out what looked like a dark spot against the white landscape, perhaps 30 yards away. "Hello," he called, urging Thunder forward. As they drew closer, his heart nearly stopped. It wasn't a log or rock as he'd first thought it was a person, buried in snow up to their neck, dark hair contrasting sharply against the white. Dane leaped from his horse, his boots sinking deep into the snow as he rushed forward. The snow had nearly covered her completely, with only her head and shoulders still visible. Her eyes were closed, her skin pale as the snow itself, lips blue with cold. "Miss Evans," he called, dropping to his knees beside her and brushing snow away from her face. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. She was alive, but barely. Without wasting another moment, Dane began to dig. The snow had compacted around her body, forming a near-solid mass that resisted his efforts. His gloved hands clawed desperately at the frozen prison that held her, but it was slow, arduous work. The wind continued to drive more snow into the holes he managed to create, as if nature itself was determined to claim this woman. "Stay with me," he urged as he dug, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I'm going to get you out of here." Minutes stretched into an hour, then longer. Dane's muscles screamed with the effort, his fingers numb despite his gloves, but he refused to stop. The light was fading fast, and he knew that if he didn't free her soon, they would both freeze to death. His own body heat was the only thing keeping him going, and even that was waning as the temperature continued to drop. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of digging, he managed to excavate enough snow to reach her shoulders and arms. She was wearing a heavy coat, but it was soaked through, offering little protection now. With renewed determination, Dane continued to dig until he had freed her to the waist. "Miss Evans, I need you to help me if you can," he said firmly, patting her cheek gently. "Can you move at all?" Her eyelids fluttered again, and this time they opened slightly. Confusion and pain clouded her gaze. "That's it," he encouraged. "I'm Dane Irwin. I have a ranch outside town. I found your horse. Penny, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She's fine, but we need to get you out of here and somewhere warm. With enormous effort, Dane managed to free her completely from the snow. She was a small woman, but the dead weight of her nearly frozen limbs made it difficult to lift her. When he tried to help her stand, she cried out in pain. My ankle, she gasped. I think it's broken. Dane didn't hesitate. He lifted her into his arms and carried her to Thunder, who stood patiently waiting, snow accumulating on his broad back. Somehow, he managed to mount with her in his arms, settling her in front of him in the saddle. I'm taking you to my cabin, he told her, wrapping one arm securely around her waist while he held the reins with the other. It's closer than town, and we'll never make it there in this storm. She nodded weakly, her head lolling against his chest. So cold, she murmured. Stay awake, he ordered, his voice harsher than he intended. Talk to me, tell me your full name. Olivia, she replied, her voice slightly stronger. Olivia Evans. Good, keep talking, Miss Evans. Why were you out in this weather? As Thunder picked his way carefully through the snow, with Penny following behind, Olivia explained about the sick children at the Wilson farm. Her words were slurred, her sentences disjointed, but Dane kept her talking, knowing that if she fell asleep, she might never wake up. It took nearly 2 hours to reach his cabin, a journey that normally would have taken less than 30 minutes. By the time the small structure came into view, Olivia had fallen silent despite his constant prompting, and Dane feared he might be too late after all. The cabin stood dark and cold, but it offered shelter from the relentless storm. Dane dismounted carefully, cradling Olivia against him, and managed to get both horses into the small stable attached to the cabin. He couldn't tend to them properly now. The woman in his arms needed immediate attention. Inside the cabin, Dane laid Olivia gently on his bed before hurrying to light the stove and a lamp. The small space was frigid, but at least they were out of the wind and snow. In the lamplight, he could see how pale she was, her lips still tinged with blue, her dark hair frozen in places. Miss Evans, he called, shaking her shoulder gently. Olivia, you need to stay awake. Her eyes opened slightly, unfocused and confused. Cold, she whispered. Dane knew what needed to be done, though the propriety of it troubled him. Her wet clothes would kill her as surely as the snow outside. But he was a gentleman, and she was a respectable woman from town. Death, however, cared nothing for propriety. Miss Evans, I need to remove your wet things, he explained, his voice firm but gentle. You'll die of cold otherwise. I'll be respectful, I swear it. She nodded weakly, perhaps too far gone to fully understand or object. Working quickly but carefully, Dane removed her sodden coat, dress, and undergarments, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible while still ensuring he was handling her injured ankle with care. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then added his own coat over the top for good measure. The stove was beginning to warm the small space, but not quickly enough. Dane had lived alone since coming to Texas 5 years ago, after the war had taken everything from him back in Virginia. He'd built this life from nothing, keeping mostly to himself, interacting with the townsfolk only when necessary. Now, this woman's life depended on him. Remembering what he'd learned during his time in the war about treating men with cold exposure, Dane knew body heat was the most effective remedy. With a deep breath, he slipped under the blankets beside her, keeping his union suit on, and pulled her against his chest. Forgive me, Miss Evans, he murmured, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. This is the only way. As the hours passed, Dane alternated between stoking the fire in the stove and returning to share his warmth with Olivia. Gradually, her breathing became deeper and more regular, and some color returned to her face. By the time dawn broke, the storm had finally subsided, leaving a pristine white landscape outside the cabin windows. Dane was dozing lightly when he felt Olivia stir against him. He opened his eyes to find her staring at him, confusion and alarm evident in her expression. "You're safe," he said quickly, moving away from her. "You were nearly frozen to death when I found you. I'm Dane Irwin. I have a small cattle ranch outside of Abilene." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "The man with the black gelding. I've seen you in town." Her voice was hoarse but stronger than it had been the night before. "Yes, madam. I don't come in often." Olivia pulled the blankets tighter around herself as awareness of her state of undress dawned on her. A flush crept up her neck. "My clothes. They were soaked through. I had to remove them. I was as respectful as possible, Miss Evans, I swear it." Dane stood, moving to the stove to give her space. "I'll find something for you to wear and then see about fixing your ankle." He retrieved a clean shirt and pair of trousers from his trunk, handing them to her without looking directly at her. "They'll be too big, but they're dry. I'll step outside while you dress." "Wait," Olivia called as he reached for the door. "Thank you for saving my life." Dane nodded once, then slipped outside to tend to the horses, giving her privacy to dress. The morning air was bitterly cold but clear, the storm having moved on to the east. At least 3 feet of snow covered everything in sight, making travel impossible for the time being. They were effectively stranded together until the snow began to melt or a path could be cleared. After ensuring both horses had feed and water, Dane returned to the cabin, knocking before entering. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, his clothes hanging comically large on her slight frame. She'd rolled the sleeves and pant legs up, but still resembled a child playing dress-up. Despite the circumstances, Dane found the sight oddly endearing. "How's the ankle?" he asked, moving to kneel in front of her. "Painful," she admitted. "But I don't think it's broken, likely just a bad sprain." "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward her foot. She nodded, and he carefully examined the swollen ankle. It was bruised, but, as she'd guessed, didn't appear to be broken. "I'll bind it for you," he said, rising to fetch some strips of clean cloth from his medical kit. He'd learned basic field medicine during the war, skills that had proven useful on the frontier. As he wrapped her ankle, Dane was acutely aware of Olivia studying him. He wasn't used to such scrutiny, having lived a solitary existence for so long. "You were a soldier," she stated rather than asked. Dane paused, then nodded once. "Confederate cavalry, a lifetime ago." "And now you're a rancher, trying to be," he said with a small smile. "It's not much of a spread yet, but it's mine." "Alone?" "Yes, madam. Just me and the cattle and horses." He secured the bandage around her ankle and sat back on his heels. "You're the nurse from town. You came out from back east somewhere." "Ohio," she confirmed. 2 years ago, they needed medical help here and I needed something different." Dane nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. Many who came west were running from something or toward something, often both. "How long do you think we'll be stranded here?" Olivia asked, looking toward the window where bright sunlight reflected off the snow. "A few days at least, unless a warming spell comes through," Dane replied honestly. "The snow's too deep for travel right now, especially with your injury. I'm afraid you're stuck with me for a while, Miss Evans." She smiled slightly. "Under the circumstances, I think you can call me Olivia." "Dane," he offered in return. "Well, Dane," she said, pushing herself up to stand cautiously on her good foot. "Since I'll be imposing on your hospitality, I insist on making myself useful. What can I help with?" Dane smiled despite himself. The woman had nearly died the night before, and here she was, ready to work. "First, you can rest that ankle. Then maybe you can help with meals. I'm not much of a cook." "That I can do," Olivia agreed, As the day progressed, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Dane tended to the necessary outdoor chores, clearing paths to the stable, checking his cattle in the nearest pasture, bringing in more firewood, while Olivia managed to prepare a surprisingly tasty stew from his meager pantry supplies. They ate together at his small table, the conversation awkward at first but gradually becoming more comfortable. Dane couldn't remember the last time he'd shared a meal and conversation with anyone, let alone a woman as educated and refined as Olivia. "So what made you decide to become a nurse?" Dane asked as they finished eating. Olivia's expression grew serious. "The war. I was 16 when it started, too young to join the nursing corps officially, but I volunteered at our local hospital. I saw how much difference proper medical care made." She paused, looking down at her bowl. "I also saw how little was being done for the communities that needed it most. After the war, I got formal training in Cincinnati, then heard about the need out west." "Your family approved of you coming all this way alone," she laughed, though there was little humor in it. "Hardly. My father wanted me to marry the banker's son and settle down to produce grandchildren. He thought nursing was fine as a wartime necessity but unsuitable for a respectable woman's permanent occupation. But you came anyway." "Yes." Her eyes met his, challenging. "Some callings are too strong to ignore, don't you think?" Dane nodded slowly. "Yes, they are." As evening approached, the temperature dropped again and Dane built up the fire in the stove. The small cabin had only the one bed, which presented an obvious dilemma. "I'll sleep on the floor," Dane said firmly when Olivia broached the subject. "Don't be ridiculous," she replied. "You'll freeze, and then where would I be? We're both adults. The bed is large enough that we can share it without impropriety." Dane raised an eyebrow. "You're very pragmatic for a town lady." "I'm a nurse before I'm a town lady," Olivia countered. "I've seen too much suffering to worry about trivial conventions when survival is at stake." That night, they slept back to back in Dane's narrow bed, a wall of blankets constructed between them. Despite the awkwardness, Dane found himself more at peace than he had been in years. The sound of another person's breathing, the shared warmth in the small cabin, these simple things reminded him of what he'd been missing in his solitary existence. For 3 days, the snow kept them confined to the cabin and immediate surroundings. They fell into a companionable routine, sharing stories and working together to maintain the small homestead. Dane learned that Olivia had lost a brother at Gettysburg, fighting for the Union. He told her about his family's farm in Virginia, burned during the war, and his decision to start fresh somewhere untouched by the conflict. "Do you ever regret coming west?" he asked her on the third evening as they sat by the stove drinking coffee. Olivia considered the question. "Sometimes. When I'm cold or scared or lonely. But then someone like the Wilsons needs help and I remember why I'm here." She looked up at him. "What about you? Do you regret your choice?" "Not the place," Dane answered honestly. "But sometimes the solitude wears on a man." Their eyes met across the small space, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit. They were both outsiders who had chosen this harsh but beautiful land, both carrying wounds from the past, both seeking something they couldn't quite name. On the 4th day, the temperature rose enough that the snow began to melt, creating pathways that would soon be passable. Dane knew he would need to take Olivia back to town the next day. The knowledge left him with an unexpected sense of loss. That evening, as Olivia stood at the small counter preparing their supper, Dane found himself watching the graceful movements of her hands, the way she tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows. She had brought life into his quiet existence, and tomorrow she would be gone. "I think we can make it to town tomorrow," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. Olivia's hands paused in their work. "Oh," she said softly. "Yes, I suppose we can. Your ankle seems better." "Much better," she agreed, though she didn't turn to face him. "Thanks to your care. People will be worried about you." Now she did turn, a small smile on her lips. "Are you trying to convince me or yourself that I should go back?" The directness of her question caught Dane off guard. "It's the proper thing," he said finally. "Yes," she agreed. "It is." They ate their final meal together mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they prepared for sleep one last time, Olivia paused by the bed. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving my life, for your kindness. For everything." "Anyone would have done the same," Dane replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. Few men would have searched so desperately in a blizzard, dug for hours in the snow, or treated a strange woman with such respect. That night, the wall of blankets between them seemed an insurmountable barrier. The next morning dawned clear and relatively warm. The snow had melted enough that travel, while still challenging, would be possible. Dane prepared Thunder and Penny for the journey while Olivia gathered her few belongings. Her own clothes, now dried, had been mended by her skilled hands during their time together. As they mounted their respective horses, Dane had insisted Olivia ride Penny now that the mare was rested. An awkward silence fell between them. "I'll escort you all the way to town," Dane said as they set off. "Thank you," Olivia replied, her voice formal once again. "I wouldn't want to impose further on your time." "It's no imposition." The journey took most of the morning, the horses picking their way carefully through the melting snow. They spoke little, as if by mutual agreement they were already returning to their separate worlds. As they approached the outskirts of Abilene, Dane felt a growing sense of unease. In town, Olivia was Miss Evans, the respected nurse. He was just the solitary rancher who rarely came to town. The connection they had formed in the isolation of his cabin seemed suddenly fragile. They had nearly reached the main street when Olivia suddenly pulled Penny to a halt. "Dane," she said, her voice soft but determined, "I don't want this to be goodbye." He looked at her, surprised by her directness. "What do you mean?" "I mean that these past few days, despite the circumstances, they've been important to me." She met his gaze steadily. "I would like to see you again, properly." For a moment Dane couldn't speak. Then slowly a smile spread across his face. "I'd like that too," he admitted. "Very much." Relief and something warmer shone in Olivia's eyes. "Then it's settled. You'll call on me." "Yes," Dane promised. "I will." As they rode the final distance into town, something had shifted between them. What had begun as a desperate rescue in a blizzard had somehow transformed into the beginning of something neither of them had been looking for, but perhaps both had been needing all along. The people of Abilene were overjoyed to see Olivia safe. Word of her disappearance during the blizzard had spread, and many had feared the worst. Dr. Milligan, the town's elderly physician, insisted on examining her immediately, while Sheriff Patterson took Dane aside for a full account of the rescue. "You saved her life, son," the sheriff said, clapping Dane on the shoulder. "That was a damn brave thing you did, going out in that storm." Dane shrugged uncomfortably. "Anyone would have." "No," the sheriff countered firmly. "Anyone wouldn't have. Most men would have headed for shelter and worried about the missing later. You're a hero in this town now, whether you like it or not." Being the center of attention was the last thing Dane wanted. As soon as he could politely extract himself, he prepared to head back to his ranch, stopping only to ensure Olivia was truly well before he left. He found her at the doctor's office, her ankle properly bandaged, color restored to her cheeks. She smiled when she saw him, a private smile that seemed meant only for him. "The doctor says I'll be fine," she told him. "Thanks to you. I'm glad," Dane replied, suddenly awkward in the formal setting of the doctor's office. "I should be getting back." "Sunday," Olivia said. "Come to town for church, and then perhaps we could have dinner afterward." Dane hadn't attended church services regularly since before the war, but he found himself nodding. "Sunday," he agreed. As he rode back to his ranch, Dane was surprised to find himself looking forward to the weekend with an eagerness he hadn't felt in years. The solitude that had been his companion for so long suddenly seemed less like peace and more like emptiness. True to his word, Dane arrived in Abilene on Sunday morning, dressed in his best and only suit, his hair neatly combed, his usually stubbled jaw clean-shaven. He drew curious glances as he entered the small church, as most of the townsfolk knew him only by sight, if at all. Olivia was already seated near the front, wearing a simple but elegant blue dress that complemented her dark hair and fair complexion. She turned as if sensing his presence, and the smile that lit her face when she spotted him sent an unexpected warmth through Dane's chest. She patted the space beside her, inviting him to join her. As he made his way down the aisle, Dane was acutely aware of the speculative glances from the other parishioners. It had been a long time since he'd cared what others thought of him, but suddenly he found himself hoping they would approve of him sitting beside Olivia Evans. The service passed in a blur, Dane more conscious of Olivia's presence beside him than the preacher's words. Afterward, as they stood outside the church in the crisp winter sunshine, several townsfolk approached to thank Dane for rescuing their nurse. "We don't know what we'd do without Miss Evans," Mrs. Carruthers, the blacksmith's wife, told him earnestly. "You're a godsend, Mr. Irwin." Dane shifted uncomfortably under the praise but managed a polite response. Beside him, Olivia watched with a mixture of amusement and sympathy, clearly aware of his discomfort. "I've prepared a meal at my boarding house," she told him when they were finally able to break away from the well-wishers. "Mrs. Henderson has given me permission to use the private parlor." "That sounds nice," Dane replied, offering her his arm. As they walked through town, Dane couldn't help but notice how at ease Olivia seemed here, greeting people by name, inquiring after ailments and family members. She belonged in a way he never had. "You're very much a part of this community," he observed. Olivia nodded. "I've tried to be useful. People tend to accept you when they need you." "Is that why you became a nurse? To be needed?" She considered this as they approached the boarding house. "Partly," she admitted, "but also because I couldn't bear the thought of not helping when I had the ability to do so." She glanced up at him. "I think you understand that," and he did. It was the same impulse that had driven him out into the blizzard when he'd found her horse, Mrs. Henderson, a plump, motherly woman in her 50s, greeted them warmly at the boarding house door. "Everything's ready in the parlor, Miss Evans, just as you asked. I've set out the meal and will leave you two in privacy." She gave Dane an appraising look. "It's good to finally meet the hero we've been hearing so much about." Once they were alone in the cozy parlor, seated at a small table set with a simple but appetizing meal, Dane felt some of his tension ease. Here, away from the curious eyes of the townsfolk, he could be himself again. "You're uncomfortable with gratitude," Olivia observed as she served him a portion of roast chicken. "I didn't do anything special," Dane insisted. "I just did what needed doing." "That's precisely what makes it special," she countered. "Most people don't do what needs doing when it's difficult or dangerous. They look away, or tell themselves someone else will handle it. Like you going out to tend the Wilson children despite the weather." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Perhaps we're alike in that way." "Perhaps we are," Dane agreed softly. As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily than Dane had anticipated. Olivia told him more about her training in Cincinnati, her decision to come west, and her work in Abilene. In return, Dane found himself sharing stories he had told no one else about his childhood in Virginia, his experiences during the war, and his dreams for his small ranch. "I want to build something that lasts," he explained. "Something I can be proud of." "Will you stay in Texas?" Olivia asked. "I plan to. This land has been good to me despite its challenges." He hesitated, then added, "What about you? Will you stay in Abilene?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. "I intended to," she said carefully. "I've found purpose here, but—" Olivia met his gaze directly. "But I find myself reconsidering many things lately." The quiet admission sent a jolt through Dane's chest. Before he could respond, however, the parlor door opened, and Mrs. Henderson entered to clear their plates. "I hope everything was to your liking," the landlady said cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the charged moment she had interrupted. "It was excellent, thank you," Dane replied, recovering his composure. After Mrs. Henderson had gone, Olivia suggested a walk. Despite the lingering snow, the day was relatively mild, and Dane was grateful for the opportunity to escape the confines of the boarding house, where he felt every word might be overheard. They strolled toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. Olivia's ankle had healed enough that she walked with only a slight limp, though Dane kept their pace leisurely. "I've been thinking," Dane said finally, as they paused to look out over the snow-covered landscape. "I need to come into town more regularly for supplies anyway." "Perhaps I could call on you during those visits," Olivia smiled. "I'd like that very much. And perhaps when the weather improves you might ride out to see the ranch, if your duties allow, of course." "I'd like that too," she replied, her smile broadening. "Very much indeed." As they stood there, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the snow, Dane was struck by how quickly and unexpectedly Olivia Evans had come to matter to him. The thought of returning to his solitary existence at the ranch now seemed hollow in a way it never had before. "I should get you back," he said reluctantly. "It'll be dark soon, and I need to start for home." As they walked back toward the boarding house, Olivia slipped her hand into the crook of his arm, a simple gesture that nonetheless filled Dane with a quiet contentment. By the time they reached her door, the first stars were appearing in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. "Thank you for today," Olivia said softly. "It was wonderful." "It was," Dane agreed. Then, gathering his courage, he added, "I'll be back on Thursday if that suits you." Thursday would be perfect. She hesitated, then rose on tiptoe and pressed a quick, soft kiss to his cheek. "Be safe riding home." Dane touched his fingers to the spot where her lips had been, momentarily speechless. "I will," he promised. As he rode back to his ranch under a canopy of stars, Dane found himself looking forward to Thursday with an anticipation that made the intervening days seem impossibly long. Something had begun between them, something unexpected and precious. For the first time in years, Dane Irwin allowed himself to hope for a future that included more than just survival. True to his word, Dane returned to Abilene on Thursday, and again the following Sunday. Each visit strengthened the connection between him and Olivia, each conversation revealing new layers to the person behind the formal exterior. By the time February arrived, bringing slightly milder weather to the Texas plains, Dane was making the journey to town twice weekly without fail. The townsfolk had grown accustomed to seeing the quiet rancher escorting their nurse to church, to dinner at the hotel restaurant, or on walks through the small town. Speculation ran rampant, of course. In a place like Abilene, any hint of romance was subject to intense interest and discussion. but neither Dane nor Olivia seemed to notice or care about the gossip their relationship had inspired. On a particularly fine Saturday in mid-February, Olivia finally took Dane up on his invitation to visit the ranch. She rode out with him after her morning rounds, wearing a practical riding habit that nevertheless managed to look elegant. "It's not much," Dane said self-consciously as his cabin came into view. "Nothing like what you're used to in town." "It's wonderful," Olivia replied with genuine enthusiasm. "You built this yourself." "Most of it," he acknowledged. The previous owner had started the cabin, but it was little more than 4 walls and half a roof when I bought the place. As he showed her around the small ranch, the cabin he had expanded, the stable he had built, the corral where he broke horses, the pasture where his small herd of cattle grazed, Dane was surprised by how much he wanted her approval. This place was his life's work, the thing he had built from nothing after losing everything in the war. "You've created something remarkable here," Olivia told him as they stood on a small rise overlooking the property. "Truly, Dane, it's beautiful." "It still needs work," he said. "I want to build a proper house eventually. The cabin's fine for one person, but it's hardly suitable for—" He broke off, suddenly aware of what he'd been about to say. Olivia looked at him, her eyes questioning. Dane took a deep breath. "For a family," he finished quietly. "Someday." A soft smile spread across Olivia's face. "I think it's a wonderful place to build a future," she said. "Whatever that future might hold." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then, with a slight shake of his head, Dane gestured toward the cabin. "I should start preparing dinner if we're to eat before it gets too late." To his surprise, Olivia proved to be quite comfortable in the rustic setting of his home. She helped prepare the simple meal, moving around his small kitchen as if she belonged there, her presence transforming the cabin in ways Dane couldn't quite define but deeply appreciated. As they ate together at his small table, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks through the cabin window, Dane found himself imagining more evenings like this, Olivia across from him, the cabin warm with shared conversation and laughter. "Penny seems to have recovered completely from her ordeal," Olivia remarked, referring to her mare which now stood contentedly in Dane's stable. "She's a strong horse," Dane replied, "like her owner." Olivia smiled at the compliment. "I never properly thanked you, you know." "You've thanked me many times." "Not properly," she insisted. "You didn't just save my life that night, Dane. You saved everything, all the possibilities that might lie ahead." She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Including this." Dane turned his hand to clasp hers, the simple contact sending warmth through him that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. "I think maybe we saved each other," he said softly. After dinner, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they sat on the small porch of the cabin, wrapped in blankets against the evening chill. Olivia leaned slightly against Dane's shoulder, her presence a comfortable weight beside him. "I should get you back to town," he said reluctantly. "It's getting late. Mrs. Henderson knows I might not return until morning if the weather turns or it gets too dark to travel safely," Olivia replied. "She's a very understanding landlady." The implication hung in the air between them. "Olivia," Dane began carefully. "I wouldn't want to compromise your reputation. My reputation," she interrupted gently, "is as a practical, independent woman who makes her own decisions. And right now, I've decided that I'm exactly where I want to be." She turned to look at him, her expression serious but her eyes soft in the gathering darkness. "Unless you want me to leave." "No," Dane said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want you to leave." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned toward her. Their lips met in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened. years of solitude and longing dissolving in the warmth of their embrace. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Olivia's eyes were bright with emotion. "I think I've been waiting for that since the moment I woke up in your bed and realized you'd saved my life," she admitted. "I've wanted to kiss you since then too," Dane confessed. "But I never thought. I mean, you're educated, refined. I'm just a rancher with dirt under his fingernails." "You're far more than just anything," Olivia replied firmly. "You're the man who searched for me in a blizzard, who dug for hours to free me from the snow, who treated me with respect and kindness when you could have taken advantage." She placed her hand against his cheek. "You're the man I've fallen in love with, Dane Irwin." The word struck him like a physical blow, sending his heart racing. "Olivia," he whispered, hardly daring to believe what he'd heard. "You don't have to say it back," she said quickly. "I just wanted you to know. Life is too short and too uncertain to leave important things unsaid. I learned that in the blizzard." But Dane couldn't let her brave declaration stand alone. "I love you too," he said, the words coming easier than he'd expected. "I think I started falling the moment you insisted on helping with chores despite nearly freezing to death the night before." Olivia laughed, the sound bright in the quiet night. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" "Yes," Dane agreed, pulling her closer. "We are." That night, Olivia stayed at the ranch, though Dane insisted on sleeping on a pallet by the stove while she took the bed. They were both aware of the proprieties expected in their time, even as they acknowledged the depth of their feelings for one another. In the morning, Dane woke to the unfamiliar but welcome sound of movement in his cabin, Olivia preparing coffee, humming softly to herself as she moved about the small space. The sight of her there, bathed in the early morning light streaming through the window, struck him with such force that he knew he could never go back to his solitary existence. Over breakfast, they spoke of practical matters, her duties in town, his responsibilities at the ranch, how they might build a future together despite these commitments. "I've been training Millie Johnson to assist with nursing duties," Olivia mentioned. "She's quite capable, and with a bit more instruction, she could manage many of the routine cases." "You're thinking of reducing your workload?" Dane asked. "Not exactly, but perhaps redistributing it. I could still attend to the more serious cases, but Millie could handle the daily ailments." "That would free me to—" She hesitated. Olivia met his gaze steadily. "To consider a life that includes more than just my work in town." The implication was clear, and it filled Dane with both hope and trepidation. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that I love you and that I can envision a future where I share my life with you," Olivia replied simply. "If that's what you want too." Dane reached across the table to take her hand. "It's what I want more than anything," he said, "but I want to do this properly." "Will you allow me to court you formally, Olivia Evans? With the intention of making you my wife if you'll have me." Her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said. "Though I believe we're already well past the early stages of courtship, don't you?" Dane laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Perhaps, but some things are worth doing right." When he escorted Olivia back to town later that morning, they rode side by side, their horses matching pace, their future stretching out before them like the wide Texas horizon, full of promise, challenge, and hope. The following months transformed both their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. Dane, once the solitary rancher who rarely came to town, became a familiar figure in Abilene as he courted Olivia with a dedication that charmed even the most skeptical observers. For her part, Olivia began training Millie Johnson more intensively, preparing the younger woman to take on greater responsibilities. She still attended to her patients with the same care and commitment, but she also made time for regular visits to Dane's ranch, helping him plan improvements and extensions to the property. By the time April arrived, bringing with it an explosion of wildflowers across the Texas plains, their intentions were clear to everyone in town. Dane had spoken formally with Dr. Milligan, who had taken on something of a fatherly role in Olivia's life since she'd arrived in Abilene. The elderly doctor had given his blessing without hesitation. "Never seen two people better matched," he'd told Dane gruffly. "About time you both found some happiness." On a perfect spring evening, with the setting sun painting the landscape in gold, Dane took Olivia to the spot where he planned to build their new home, a gentle rise overlooking the creek that ran through his property, sheltered by a stand of oak trees that would provide shade in the brutal Texas summers. "It'll have a proper porch," he told her, gesturing to where it would be, "and large windows to catch the breeze. 3 bedrooms to start with, but room to expand if needed." "When will you begin building?" Olivia asked, her hand tucked securely in his as they surveyed the site. Dane took a deep breath. "That depends on you," he said, turning to face her. "I had thought to wait until the house was finished before asking, but I find I can't wait any longer." He dropped to one knee before her, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small ring, a simple gold band with a single pearl, not ostentatious but beautiful in its simplicity. "Olivia Evans, you came into my life like a miracle in the middle of a blizzard. You've brought warmth and purpose and joy where there was only solitude before. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person, and I want to spend the rest of my life building a future with you." He held out the ring. "Will you marry me?" Tears shone in Olivia's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Dane Irwin, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms, Dane felt a sense of rightness that transcended words. This was what he had been working toward all these years, though he hadn't known it, not just a ranch or a home, but a life shared with someone who understood him completely. They were married on the first Saturday in May, in the small church in Abilene where they had sat together that first Sunday. The entire town seemed to turn out for the occasion, the church filled to capacity with people who had come to care for both the quiet rancher and their dedicated nurse. Olivia wore a dress of ivory satin that Mrs. Henderson and several other ladies from town had helped her make. Her dark hair was adorned with wildflowers, and she carried a bouquet of the same. As she walked down the aisle toward Dane, his heart felt too full for his chest, overflowing with gratitude and love. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to stand by each other through whatever challenges life might bring, to build a home filled with love and compassion, to remember always the precious gift they had found in each other. "I thought I was rescuing you that night in the blizzard," Dane said as part of his vows, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "But the truth is, you rescued me from a life half-lived. I promised to spend every day trying to be worthy of that gift." "You found me when I was buried in snow and despair," Olivia responded, her voice clear and strong. "And you didn't just save my life, you showed me what it could be. I promise to walk beside you, to build with you, to love you through whatever storms may come." As they exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife, a cheer went up from the assembled townsfolk that nearly raised the roof of the small church. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, with what seemed like every resident of Abilene contributing food, music, or decorations. Dane, normally uncomfortable in crowds, found himself surprisingly at ease, anchored by Olivia's presence at his side and the genuine goodwill of the community that had become, almost without his noticing, a part of his life. That night, When they finally returned to the ranch, their ranch now, they stood for a moment on the porch of the cabin that had sheltered them during that fateful blizzard. "It seems so long ago now," Olivia said softly, looking out at the stars. "That night when Penny threw me and ran off." "And yet it was only a few months," Dane replied, his arm around her waist. "How quickly life can change." "For the better," she added, turning in his arms to face him. "Definitely for the better." As he carried his bride across the threshold of the cabin that night, Dane knew that his life had been divided into two parts, before Olivia and after. And while he wouldn't wish the terror of that blizzard on anyone, he couldn't help but be grateful for the storm that had brought this remarkable woman into his life. The months that followed were filled with hard work and deep joy as Dane and Olivia built their life together. Construction on the new house began immediately, with Dane hiring several men from town to help with the larger tasks while he handled the finer details himself. Olivia divided her time between her nursing duties in town, now shared with Millie, who was proving to be a capable assistant and helping to create a home at the ranch. She planted a vegetable garden near the cabin, started a small orchard that would eventually provide fruit, and transformed the interior of the cabin with simple but beautiful touches that made the space truly theirs. By October, as the first cool breezes of autumn swept across the plains, the framework of their new home stood proudly on the rise overlooking the creek. Dane worked from dawn to dusk most days, determined to have the house weathertight before winter set in. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Olivia told him one evening as she tended to his blistered hands. "The house doesn't need to be finished overnight." "I want it ready before the bad weather comes," Dane replied. "I don't want to risk another winter like the last one with you in that cabin." "It's too small, too drafty." Olivia's expression softened. "That cabin saved my life," she reminded him, "and it's where we fell in love. I'm quite fond of it." "Even so," Dane insisted, "you deserve better." "What I deserve is a husband who doesn't work himself to exhaustion," she countered, pressing a kiss to his palm. "Besides, I have something to tell you that might make you reconsider your timeline." Dane looked up sharply. "What is it? Are you unwell?" Olivia laughed, the sound like music in the small cabin. "Quite the opposite," she assured him. "But it seems our family will be growing sooner than we planned. I'm expecting a child, Dane, due in early spring by my calculations." For a moment, Dane couldn't speak, the news washing over him in waves of shock, joy, and anxiety. Then he was on his feet, gathering Olivia into his arms, lifting her off the ground in his enthusiasm. "A baby," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Our baby." "Yes," Olivia confirmed, her own eyes bright with happiness. "Our child." As he held his wife close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, Dane was struck by the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate rescue in a blizzard to building a family together, it was more than he had ever dared to dream. "I'll have the house ready," he promised. "Our child will be born in a proper home." And true to his word, Dane redoubled his efforts, working alongside the hired men through the shortening days of autumn. The house took shape rapidly, a solid, two-story structure with wide porches and large windows, built to withstand the harsh Texas weather while providing comfort and beauty for his growing family. By Christmas, they were able to move in, though some of the finer details remained unfinished. Olivia, now visibly carrying their child, transformed the new house into a home with the same efficiency and warmth she brought to everything. She hung curtains, arranged furniture, and filled the spaces with small touches that reflected both their personalities. Their first Christmas in the new house was a quiet celebration, just the two of them, though several of the townsfolk rode out the day after for an impromptu housewarming. Dr. Milligan insisted on examining Olivia and pronounced both mother and child to be in excellent health. "You've done well, Irwin," the doctor told Dane privately as they stood on the porch, watching the women fuss over Olivia inside. "Both with this house and with our Olivia. Never seen her happier." "She's made me happier than I thought possible," Dane replied honestly. As winter settled over the plains once more, bringing snow and bitter winds, Dane often found himself thinking of the previous year's blizzard. He would watch the snow falling outside their bedroom window, Olivia sleeping peacefully beside him, and offer silent gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her into his life. In early March 1876, as the first tentative signs of spring began to appear across the land, Olivia went into labor. Dane rode to town at a breakneck pace to fetch Dr. Milligan, nearly killing his horse in the process. By the time they returned, Olivia's pains were coming regularly. "First babies often take their time," the doctor assured Dane, who was pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. "She's strong and healthy. Try not to wear a hole in your new floorboards." But Dane couldn't be still. The sounds of Olivia's labor tore at his heart, making him feel helpless in a way he hadn't experienced since the war. He prayed as he hadn't in years, bargaining with God to keep her safe, to protect the child they had made together. After what seemed an eternity, a new sound filled the house, the indignant cry of a newborn taking its first breath. Dane froze, his heart pounding, until Dr. Milligan opened the bedroom door, his lined face breaking into a broad smile. "Congratulations, Irwin," the older man said. "You have a son. A strong, healthy boy, and Olivia is doing fine." Dane nearly collapsed with relief. "Can I see them?" "Of course. They're waiting for you." Inside the bedroom, Olivia sat propped against pillows, her face tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as Dane entered, her smile brighter than the spring sunshine streaming through the window. "Come meet your son," she invited softly. Dane approached the bed almost reverently, looking down at the tiny face of his child for the first time. The baby was red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair like his mother's, and as Dane watched, he opened his eyes blue as most newborns were, but with a hint of the green they might become. "He's perfect," Dane whispered, his throat tight with emotion. "You're both perfect." Carefully, as if handling the most fragile glass, he took the swaddled infant from Olivia, cradling his son in arms that had once wielded weapons, and now held something infinitely more precious. "What shall we call him?" Olivia asked, watching the two of them with love shining in her eyes. Dane considered for a moment. "What about Samuel?" he suggested. "After my father, Samuel William Irwin." "Samuel," Olivia repeated, trying the name. "I like it, Sam for short." "Sam," Dane agreed, looking down at the miracle in his arms. "Welcome to the world, Sam Irwin. You have your mother's strength and beauty, and I hope very little of my stubbornness." Olivia laughed, the sound filling the room with joy. "I don't know about that. A little stubbornness might serve him well out here. As doctor." Milligan discreetly left them alone with their new son. Dane sat carefully on the edge of the bed, still holding Sam, his free arm going around Olivia's shoulders. "Thank you," he said softly against her hair. "For our son, for our life together, for everything." "We made him together," Olivia reminded him, leaning into his embrace. "Just as we're building this life together." She reached up to touch his face, her eyes meeting his. "I never thought I could be this happy, Dane, not even in my wildest dreams." "Nor I," he admitted. "I thought my life would always be solitary, that I'd grow old alone on this ranch with just my horses and cattle for company. And now I have everything I never knew I needed," Dane replied, his voice rough with emotion. "A wife I adore, a son to raise. A true home, not just a place to sleep. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. I found all of that the day I found you buried in the snow. As they sat together in the warm bedroom of the house they had built, their newborn son sleeping peacefully in Dane's arms, the memory of that bitter blizzard seemed like a distant dream. Out of the frozen despair of that night had come the warmth and joy that now filled their lives, a love story born in ice, but sustained by the enduring flame they had kindled together. Over the years that followed, the Irwin Ranch prospered under Dane and Olivia's careful stewardship. They added to their herd of cattle, bred and sold horses that became known for their strength and intelligence, and expanded the original property by purchasing adjacent land when it became available. Sam grew into a sturdy, thoughtful boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's green eyes. He was joined 2 years after his birth by a sister, Elizabeth Josephine, who from her earliest days showed signs of having inherited Olivia's determination and Dane's quiet resolve. Olivia continued her nursing work in a limited capacity, training other women in medical care while focusing primarily on her family and the ranch. Her garden expanded into a productive enterprise that supplied not only their own table, but also provided vegetables and fruits for sale in town. She became known throughout the county for her healing skills and her practical wisdom. Dane, once the solitary rancher who avoided town whenever possible, found himself increasingly involved in the community. He served on the school board, helped organize cattle drives, and even reluctantly accepted a position as deputy sheriff during a particularly lawless period when several cattle-rustling gangs were operating in the area. Their home became a gathering place for friends and neighbors, known for its warmth and hospitality. The wide porches that Dane had insisted on building proved perfect for summer evenings when folks from town would ride out to escape the heat and enjoy Olivia's lemonade and company. Through it all, through the challenges of frontier life and the joys of watching their children grow, Dane and Olivia remained each other's strongest supporters and deepest loves. They never forgot the miraculous circumstances of their meeting, the blizzard that had nearly taken Olivia's life, but had instead given them both a new beginning. On particularly cold winter nights, they would tell their children the story how their father had searched through a blinding snowstorm, how he had found their mother buried up to her neck in snow, how he had dug for hours to free her. "Your father is the bravest man I've ever known," Olivia would say, her eyes meeting Dane's across the firelit room. "And your mother is the strongest woman I've ever met," Dane would add. "Strong enough to survive that blizzard and stubborn enough to put up with me all these years." The children loved the story, especially as they grew old enough to appreciate what a close call it had been, how easily their family might never have existed at all. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, with Sam now 8 and Elizabeth 6, Dane surprised Olivia with a special gift, a small silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children, engraved on the back with the words "From the snow, warmth. From despair, hope. From chance, love." "It's perfect," Olivia whispered as he fastened it around her neck. "Absolutely perfect." That night, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch swing Dane had built years before, watching the stars emerge in the clear Texas sky. Olivia's head rested on his shoulder, her hand in his as it had been countless times over their years together. "You ever wonder what would have happened if Penny hadn't thrown you that day?" Dane asked. "Or if I hadn't found her?" "Sometimes," Olivia admitted. "But then I think that somehow we would have found each other anyway, that we were meant to be together, and if not that blizzard, then some other circumstance would have brought us to this same place." "I like that thought," Dane said, squeezing her hand gently. "That no matter what, we would have found our way to each other. We did survive a war that kept us on opposite sides, Olivia pointed out. And we both ended up in the same small corner of Texas. If that's not destiny, I don't know what is. Dane laughed softly. You always were the romantic one. Says the man who dug through snow for hours to save a woman he didn't even know, Olivia countered, tilting her head to look up at him. The best decision I ever made, Dane said simply. As they sat together under the vast Texas sky, surrounded by the home and family they had built together, neither could imagine a different life. The blizzard that had nearly claimed Olivia had instead given them both a gift beyond measure, a love that had grown from desperate rescue to enduring partnership, a family that brought joy to every day, a future that stretched before them as wide and promising as the frontier itself. And each winter, when the first snow fell, they would share a special look, a private acknowledgement of the storm that had changed their lives forever. For what had begun in ice had blossomed into the warmest and most enduring love either could have imagined, a love story written not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the quiet, steadfast commitment of two people who had found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were searching for. In the end, it was the simplest truth. She had been buried up to her neck in snow, and he had dug for hours until he found her. And in finding her, Dane Irwin had discovered the greatest treasure of his life.